I'm Josh, talking about digging deep into NAND. Blah, 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 blah. I am a human. So last time I gave this talk was an hour, so I'm going to rush it, and hopefully we don't have 20 minutes at the end. When I started this whole thing, I was doing a lot of implantation type work, and I was basically doing air to glass. So, I could be on a device as long as that device was turned on. I hadn't rebooted, and then I'd reboot. I'd lose everything, and then I'd have to get back on it. It really sucked. But it was nice if you never, ever, ever wanted to be found. But I wanted persistence, and I wanted persistence that would actually be really, really, really well hidden. So I started looking, at least on cell phones, of where, how you actually write data, way down at the driver and sub-driver level, all that junk, how it works. Because I wanted a way to reliably hide. And then I looked at NAND, and I was like, whoa, NAND's kind of cool, which is this talk. So yes, I can hide files. And then I started looking into the implications of how those files are hidden in NAND. And I came up with a completely new toy, which will be the last part of the talk. But in general, yes, we can dive deep and hide things. We can also break the crap out of things. So I'm going to babble one slide on defense. Sorry, I'll actually do it twice for the lulz. I'm going to explain how Flash works in hardware and then software. We'll get into all the different methods you can break it, and then I'll walk you through how I broke it. That's on GitHub. And all of the code, all of my presentations, DARPA paid me to do this work, so I've got a 200-page deliverable or something. It's all on GitHub. So if I don't go into the detail, please A, chat with me, and B, read until your eyes bleed. So defense. I want to make sure we can't break NAND. Yeah, it's broken in hardware. It's broken in hardware design. It's broken in conceptual hardware design. You can't patch hardware, and you also can't even patch the ideas that went into building that hardware. It's just intrinsically the way it has to work has a fallacy that we can just abuse like crazy. So the best thing we can do for defense is really create some tools that at least let us look in the places I'm poking, because there's nothing right now. So if you know more about NAND than me, which possible, I'm trying to shorten all my explanations for 30 minutes, so don't be mean. NAND in general, I'm going to refer to everything as buckets. So you have a bucket that has an electrical charge. It's either a 1 or a 0, right? Is there an electron trapped in the bucket? That's going to be, I'm going to refer to that as bucket. You have collections of buckets called pages. We're kind of starting to get a little more familiar here from the Linux world. Pages collect into blocks. The quirky thing about NAND that is the basis of this whole problem, or one of the two, is everything's initially set to 1. So you have fresh NAND, it's boom, you've got all Fs. There's a electron in every single bucket. You can shift to 1 by easy by just opening the little latch, which is down at the bottom. You can see that's actually not NAND flash, but it kind of gets the idea. You can raise it. Our beautiful little electron leaves. Now that 1 is a 0. We're all good. These things are fragile, and they break, not constantly, but they are designed known being fragile. They break over time. And to combat that, we have to have a way to say, never, ever, ever use this bucket again. But with conceptually how NAND works, you can't really just say, don't use that 1 bit. That's not how computers work, right? So you have a fail-safe threshold, and after this many bits are bad, you just don't use that page or that block. And everyone kind of knows this. That's where we're going. That's a really ugly slide. So there's 2 different types of NANDs. Now that we kind of know it can break, and they know it can break, there's 2 different types of NAND you see out in the wild. You see basically raw NAND, which is expecting something else to do all the management. It's what I'm going to talk about today. And then there's managed NAND. Managed NAND typically has a nice little Turing-complete embedded controller-y thing in there that does, on-chip wear leveling and blah, 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 blah. They're a lot of fun. I've done work. I'm not releasing that work publicly. because it's all vendor proprietary secrets that I don't want to get sued for. But if you want it, please chat with me. So on the Josh doesn't get sued side of the house, we have NAND flash, which is just raw. It's expecting, in our case, the Linux kernel to take care of error correction control values, bad block management, wear leveling, and a generic block driver so Linux or Android or whatnot can speak to it. So when things start to go bad at a hardware level, our little flapper valves start dying and they don't work anymore. Initially, ECC catches that, right? We do some bit correction. We can recover some bad data. Once it hits a threshold and we no longer trust that, we mark that whole block in the bad block table, saying, never, ever, ever use this section of NAND again. It's bad. It's untrustworthy. But you have to store that somewhere. So it's stored in either the BBT, which is the bad block table, and then typically the BBT is stored out of bounds. So you can't just accidentally step on it, if you're dealing in the normal world. So the BBT actually, in the handful of places I looked at in this research, there's three main places I found it. BBT on really simple devices is actually stored in NAND, and then during like pre-boot and boot of the kernel actually loads that up because it's managing everything. And then it keeps the valid bad block table in kernel RAM. So if you can change that during a proper shutdown, that gets written back down into NAND, and then the next time it boots, it comes up. So you don't even have to do anything remotely hardware-y at that point. If you have code execution at the kernel layer, you can have a lot of fun. You don't have to fight anymore. Your job's done. On the Sony devices that I'm going to be poking at today, we had out-of-bounds markers at the front and back of segments of blocks, and that's where the BBT is. So basically, the first 2 pages of every block is where the BBT is for that block. It's just a couple flags saying, trust this block or not. That's what I'll be showing how to attack today. And then there are other devices that just say the very beginning or very end of RAM, or NAND, this is where the whole actual table for the whole device is. And you see those a lot more in slightly more complex NAND that we're not fighting with. On the software side, raw NAND, very simple in hardware. You have a very complicated driver because something has to do that heavy lifting. MMC, eMMC, which is what you see in most of the phones that you're carrying in your pockets. Unless you're carrying a Sony. Does anyone have a Sony? Okay. Then everyone's got eMMC probably is the main storage in their device. That's got a really simple driver because the embedded machine actually does most of the work. And all that is exposed to the kernel that's running your phone, for the most part, is a very simple block driver. They tried to do a flash transition layer and generify everything away so it was very simple to interface with. All of these things, other than the one that I'm going to talk about in a second, are proprietary and closed. They don't want you to know how they do wear leveling across the device. And they don't want you to know how they do a whole bunch of other things, so you have to reverse the hell out of them. But every single one of these, either simple or complex driver, still has to adhere to an API, right? So we can still touch it, we can still poke at it. We just have to grow a neck beard and actually start mucking with the Linux kernel a little more. So I found this and I fell in love. I was like, sweet. The MTD subsystem does a ton of stuff. It's like a meta driver. If you've ever opened up the Linux kernel source tree and started looking at how it does things, a lot of drivers get loaded in later and whatnot, but MTD is just like, boom, I compile with the kernel, I'm just there, and I support all these things. It's great. Even if MTD partitions are not used during runtime, you still see a ton of them on Android, like boot and pre-boot things, which is fun for future work. So since we have an API, and we kind of know We got a couple of moving pieces, but they're starting to make a little more sense here. We want to break this. We want to be able to hide files, because that's what we care about. I can hit it at the file system level, because the file system level has to talk to the kernel, and they have to like shake hands, right? And then all that has to somehow talk to a driver that talks to the hardware. So I could poke there. We could blow all that stuff away and deal with the actual driver level in the MTD, which was a lot easier. And you can kind of abuse the whole kernel if you want. And then there's the embedded controllers. So, like again, if you want to continue this work, please hit me up. I have things not on GitHub. When I started the whole attack, I expected a whole bunch of hardware stuff, because it's NAND, and I wanted a hardware gig to do on the side so I could babble about it. That's not what I got at all. What I got was buying a ton of phones and then asking JDuck to run commands on his phones, trying to find something that ran MTD across the board. I didn't want to fight with YAFs. I didn't want to fight with embedded controllers. I was just like, I want to own the hell out of this small, easy thing to talk about. So I bought a ton, and it was like, buy on eBay, ADB shell, like run 2 commands. No, it doesn't work. Shit, right back, sell it on eBay. Sorry if you bought one of those phones, especially one of the later ones, when I started hiding crap. So yeah, that was a really ugly slide. So I found this. I love this phone. This is a Sony Ericsson Xperia Arc. This is the Arc S. So they're pretty cool. They're kind of waterproofy. They're neat. They were hyping them for a little while, and they kind of did away with that form factor, which was sad. It's actually a nice phone. It's really nice for me because everything is just straight up MTD. So everything's managed by what I want to manage it, which means my driver is talking to, the system partition, the apps log, like cache. Like I can talk to everything, which means I can hide things everywhere I want. So I started, now that I found a device, I went back and started looking at the kernel a little more. And in the MTD subsystem, you have this test directory, which is where they put all their unit tests and stuff. And they already had a whole bunch of things for like really abusing the hell out of NAND to like make it crash and dies when they were testing the driver. I was like, sweet, I'll use a kernel module too to prove that I can hide files. And all of this is what's on GitHub. So all I'm doing is taking the API that's already supported in MTD to prove the concept that I can write arbitrarily anywhere I want on NAND, flip that bit that says I'm a good block or I'm a bad block to bad, and that's it. Then I reboot. Nothing sees that block anymore. That block is gone from the system. The kernel doesn't see it anymore. The MTD driver doesn't see it anymore. It's just like non-existent. The very first thing it does when it boots is checks all of those bits or that bad block table saying, am I going to map this and allow this to be accessible? And no, it's not. It disappears. The fun thing is, if you know what block it was, even if the kernel doesn't know about that block, if you say, hey, try block 37, the kernel's like, oh, 37? Well, I can't read it, but I'm going to let you read and write to it. Sweet. Hidden. Nice and hidden. So, code. This is like my main thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move all the data out of the block. I got really lazy, and it's just a stub. But I was trying to be clean, especially when we get to the demo. You'll see why. Then I want to erase the whole block. So I just want to set everything to Fs that was there. So I've got a whole big, nice, fat block to play with. Then I'm going to write my buffers to the block. And then I'm going to mark that block bad. There's actually 2 hooks in the framework to do this. I call both of them just as kind of a proof of how all this stuff works. And I tried to comment the hell out of the code, especially even the MTD sections that weren't mine. I tried to comment them, so if you wanted to read through and understand this quirky stuff, it's all there. So try to actually call the framework to mark bad. That always fails. I've never seen any of the devices I've poked at let me use the framework directly to mark it bad, because it checks some ECC values and some thresholds and just says, like, no, dude, it's not bad. It's all good. So I always get that failure why mark bad. So then I copy and paste that code that it's calling directly by me, but I take out the ECC check and my manual marked bad. And this always works. I've never gotten my other print off. So now I have a bad block. That block is bad, and I've stomped all over it. It's just gone. Demo. This is like a really lame demo, because how do you show that you hid shit? So what I did instead was show the crash, because I really thought that the way the Sony phone crashed was gorgeous. So we've got it. I'm hitting enter. I'm sideloading my kernel module right now, and we've already lost power. Yeah, and now we have a slow drain, and it's gone. And that's it. I can mark things bad and keep the phone from crashing. That's actually trivial. I'm purposely double releasing my handle to the file system, or not to the file system, to that driver, so I can cause the crash, because I need a reboot so when it comes back up, the kernel no longer knows about that area. When we do that, we get this, because I just stomped over randomly picked block 37. 37 on this phone happens to be the block that the settings.app is stored, or part of it. So I have a phone that has no settings app anymore. It's just gone. Well, actually, it says dead beef, but there's a big chunk of dead beef that can't be read in there. To kind of prove it and make sure I was doing everything right, I read some tools for finding. The first one basically just scans the whole thing outside of kernel land and says, manually tell me every block that's marked bad. That's all I want to know. Just so you can kind of get a feel for how those things are going. The second one actually prints out both the out-of-bounds area up top, which is all the O's, because we just released everything to flip that bit sloppily, and then I've got a ton of dead beef in there. So you can start seeing that even though that's bad, and even though the kernel doesn't know about that area, with some really, really, really simple code, I can still reach in there and do anything I want. I can write, I can read, I can move things around. It's just gone from any of the tools that that the phone knows about to use, because every single reach that the phone itself is going to do to get into NAND, the very first thing in that call checks the bad block table, and it'll fail just going, I can't do that. So if you want to read into something that's bad, you actually have to implement your own that just comments out that call. And that was me in a nutshell. I mean, that's the awesome part, right? It was just I can mark things bad, and I can hide data, and I can read and write, and I can do it all from shellcode, and it's fun. And okay, that was the goal, and that felt trivial. So what else can we do? And how can we make sure that nothing can read it? DD. I DD'd that phone 3 or 4 times. I never, ever saw dead beef for 512K worth of just dead beef sitting in there. DD couldn't find it unless someone has better DD food than me. Flashing a new ROM doesn't reclaim it, because the first thing anything that kernel landia does is check bad block. Oh, it's bad. I'm not going to write to it. So reflashing, factory reset, nothing. It's just there until I don't want it to be. So I was like, cool. I can eat 512K at a time. How much can I eat? I'm hungry, man. So I had the first Sony phone I did. It's got I think 32 gigs on there. Took a lot of reboots to not have 32 gigs, but that phone has validly 3 megs of flash left on it. Not enough to even boot Android. It's just fail. So don't buy phones from me on eBay. So we can kill things. We can eat and arbitrarily write data. That's fun. But then I kind of went back to, I'll talk about forensics real quick. There are forensics tools, and DD, with good DD foo, you can dump bad blocks. DD does know how to get around that trick. But remember that all of the wear leveling is proprietary, right? No one kind of really knows how that right wear leveling is going unless you're have spent a lot of time REing it, or you work at the company that makes that specific chip. Because very few of us do, I can play really brutal tricks with you even if you're DDing and getting my bad blocks, because you don't know how wear leveling works. I know how to basically obfuscate the hell out of data. I can hide as many blocks as I want. I can make it look like trash still. I can make it look like garbage. Because you have to assume that if it's marked as a bad block, it failed. So you have to expect that a lot of that is already corrupted. As long as I'm not stupid and just start writing at byte 1 and just kind of go, we could start playing a cat and mouse game, but I'm fairly sure, given that tools right now don't even look for me, I can stay well ahead of you. So, yeah, interleaving, good data, bad data. I don't have to stomp the whole thing. If I'm going to write, I can do it differently. So, then I started thinking about what else we could do. Sean Moyer laughed at me fully on this, and I loved it, because all I really wanted to do was hide data, right? Like I don't want to do air to glass anymore. I want to be resident. And I was like, ooh, embedded systems, cool. They don't have much memory. And they're like, typically, you've got like 2 different types of, you've got the Tamagotchi type embedded system, and then you've got like industrial controllers on a pipeline that are out in the middle of nowhere embedded system. Those are interesting to me because there's no human there. What happens if you remove the hard drive remotely? What if you remove the hard drive in a way that there is no hard drive anymore, and you never ever have to get out of your chair in your basement to do it? So I started playing a little bit more with that. I actually don't have a slide, so I'll just talk. I can eat 512 at a time, or I can eat 5 megs at a time. It doesn't really, it's arbitrary how many blocks I mark bad before I do the double release to make the kernel reboot me. Which means that on any embedded system, I can reach in and start marking your drive bad. You can't recover it. It's dead. There's not enough flash left in the device to boot something so any of your tools can say, yes, I want to mark all those good again and reflash data. It's gone. I've beaten you. I've made your bootable window so small you can't get code to boot normally. You could like reflash me from the outside or something like that, but if you're dealing with an embedded system, I can eat so much memory that you can't boot to actually fix it without replacing it. And I can do it remotely as long as I've got codecs in the kernel, which that's why I had Oppenheimer moment, because I could break a lot of things. So I kind of wanted to talk about defense again, right? Because that bothered me a little more. And it's intrinsic. The hardware dies. The hardware has to fail. That's how the hardware works. There's protections in place to make sure that software and everything above that continue to function as normal because we know the hardware is going to die. But there's no way to inherently change that trust to say, oh, I think that was arbitrarily marked bad. I'm going to trust it again. You can't really do that because they fail normally. That BIP logically doesn't flip. Unless you were really constrained in how you were dealing with it. So I've written some tools that log, and you can at least like timestamp, 50 blocks were marked bad at one reboot. Like, yeah, it's probably not legit. That's probably me. But that's about the best that I could offer up right now to defend against this. So you could also try to, if you were trying to be defensive, just like FF every bad block, right? But that doesn't work because blocks die naturally, which means you're not going to get a full FF. So if you're actually trying to FF those blocks and then check them to see, like, are they wiped? Like, no, they're not going to be wiped because they're failed. Like, things die. You can't trust that. So we've got like a complete lockdown there from what I see, just from like a chess game. And again, like you could not use NAND, but I don't think the modern world could work without NAND. So yeah, the last fun thing is I want all your data. I don't want to exfil it over Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi sucks, man. Like trying to do that is not fun. But I'm in your machine. I just don't want to be spotted on the network. So I take whatever files I want from you. I mark them bad. They're gone. You can't see them anymore. You're like, I wanted to give that presentation. You take it to your IT, your IT guy. Your IT is like, I don't know what's wrong with it. I'm going to do a secure wipe, and I'm going to throw it in the dumpster, or I'm going to send it back to Dell, or whatever, right? A secure wipe doesn't get rid of those files. Like, they're still mine, right? All I have to do is be able to get my hands on that after the IT guy's given up and pulled all his hair out. So you may have written over the disk, 2 million times with zeros and ones. The very first thing all of the code I found that did was that exact same check that the kernel does of, is this marked bad? Okay, I'm not going to mess with it. So secure wipe, not so much. So yeah, in a nutshell, I was trying to actually finish early for questions. That's me, Twitter, and GitHub if you want to play more. So, any questions? Yes.
So it seems you mentioned Turing machines, some of these. So it seems if you can use that to drop files and somehow bypass a lot of sort of traditional forensic programs. You can, instead of hiding, you can hide something, plug it into someone's computer, and then drop it on the machine. Is that something? Have you looked into that?
I've started to look into that. In general, it was, I'm going to generalize your question to just, have we played with the Turing machine? Is that fair? Okay. And what can we do with it? In general, yes, I've started. I've got dumps. I understand quite a bit of the logic. I'm probably not going to get up on stage and talk about it because it gets vendor proprietary real quick, and that makes people very mad. But it is definitely possible. And if you want to ping me afterwards, it won't be on GitHub, but yeah, we can share and talk. That's an intriguing space. Yes.
So what about as part of a garbage collection routine, exercising blocks that are marked as bad to get rid of any potential hidden data?
I mean, you could. So garbage collection routine, can you randomly on boot, whatever, start just trying to exercise those blocks?
Or even in the background during idle cycle.
Yeah. You can, but again, you can't trust the output because blocks do die bad. I mean, on the SSD that I've got in there, I forget how many ungodly number of blocks there are, but I mean, it's a year old. I've got like 30 or 40 bad blocks that I didn't do. So when I try to write FFs to them, I don't get that. I get FF to some threshold. So to kind of play a cat and mouse game, right? If I know that threshold, if I know that your MacBook has a threshold of it has to be 85% valid bits that I can write to, I'll just eat a couple more blocks and I'll keep the files I want to hide into that 15% of bits that would have actually validly marked it bad to fail. And then I can protect that right. Does that make sense?
But I mean, even if the bit is bad and it failed to actually take the command to write it, if any of the bits were good, if you're flexing those, you would get rid of any hidden data. So your window of finding the data would be very small.
It was if I couldn't arbitrarily grab more blocks. But yeah, let's talk after. I'm trying to get Bay Fair. Yes, theoretically they're based, or in theory and reality, they're based on the exact same assumptions that hardware fails. The only difference is for raw NAND or unmanaged NAND, it's handled at the kernel, so it's a lot easier to walk through and show. But conceptually, the only difference you have to say is that MTD subsystem is now pushed down on the chip. It's actually not that one, but I mean, it's vendor proprietary, it's pushed down there, but they're still playing with the exact same rule set that we are at the MTD system. What? Yes, you can. You can target specific blocks on the managed NAND if you've reversed their protocols enough to know how to do it. But it's not designed to be used that way. It's designed to be a black box of, I'm going to just write. So does it make sense to back up the bad block table and then check it back, like maybe every reboot or something, right? Yeah, that would actually probably be a really good way to catch me unless I was greedy. That would slow me down to really having to care about your device for a long time instead of just, hit you once. Yeah, I actually like that.
Are all blocks considered equal by you, or are there better blocks to use random data than others?
They're all random. I don't care. There's obviously when I stepped over block 37 and I actually had visual side effects from the phone, right? Like I stepped over something. If I'm going to be lazy and not copy that data somewhere else, then I'm going to look for an empty block, which is pretty trivial to do. But if not, if I'm actually going to have to copy data out of that block because I don't understand the where leveler, then I have to reach up to the file system level to kind of start remapping things, which is what I didn't want to do.
In your experience, what's the prevalence of unmanaged NAND now? Has most vendors gone to make managed NAND products?
For Android phones, the only phone I could find after buying like 100 different phones was the Sony's. I don't know why Sony was just like, unmanaged, it's great. But for the iPhone, for almost all the other Android phones I bought, other than a couple off Alibaba type quality, were all managed. So, but there's like 3 vendors. So if you reverse them, you get a third of the phones. You reverse the next vendor, you get another third. I mean,
but you also mentioned
SCADA and other things like that. Most of what I've seen is actually raw NAND that's dealt with. Yeah, I was surprised. I would figure it would be the other way, but most of the SCADA-esque type systems I played with have raw NAND in them.
And SSDs are mostly managed like that?
In a different way. SSDs are still managed, just in a slightly different. I haven't torn a ton of them apart. I've torn like 2. So. So, I mean, if you're popping the chip and you're throwing it into a quality recovery device, right, you're doing a full professional forensics hit on it. At that point, you've upped your game to where you're probably going to be looking at everything. So I've been able to hide from the normal user, but if I'm going to hide from you pulling the chip off the phone and throwing it into specific hardware that's going to rawly read everything, I'm going to have to then start playing tricks with the wear leveler, which, again, you can up your game to me as a forensics lab, understand the wear leveler. So there are cases where it would fail, or at least to get exceedingly exponentially hard, and we're going to just start playing war games on file hiding again. I've just been assuming that if I'm trying to hide something and I'm sophisticated enough to get kernel memory to be able to do it once, short of you popping the chip, if I detect something, I'm going to just wipe anyway. But yeah, if you pop the chip, at least like on the phone I'm carrying in my pocket, you would find me. So how do you know if your hidden data blocks have turned bad? This is actually like one of the more enjoyable things. Everything in that MTD subsystem, the very first thing it does is check, is this a bad block or not? And then it doesn't do anything more. But if you start looking at the code, it's really complicated after that, but it's always the very first call. So for one of the custom phones that I did, I just nulled that value to say, always return, no, it's not a bad block. Like, don't even do the check, but just in that function, return, it's good. At that point, the error correction checking, all the other management and stuff still works. I can't double mark a block as bad, but I still get all of the modern conveniences of having hardware and software work together to check to make sure my writes are correct, my reads are correct. I can latch and get the warnings that something's getting ready to pass that threshold. So I can still utilize all the same tools if I really want to. It's just I've got to be very embedded to do that. You could, but I can also call, since the ECC data is also stored statically for you to check against, I can call in, I can write my data to it, and I'm not going to conflict with that ECC value because I can step on it to be what it needs to be. At the layer we're dealing with, it checks and compares against a value that's known, and that value that's known I can also control. I'm sorry, I actually couldn't hear you. If I'm being very, very careful, I would. But remember that once a block goes bad, no checks are ever done by the kernel anymore. So the kernel or any typical tools that I've seen on the market today will ever check that ECC value. So I mean, we could get in the cat and mouse, war game type thing. But for the tools that are on the market right now, it's irrelevant because once that's bad, it doesn't exist. All fun stops running on it. Cool. Any more questions?
Have you looked into how you can potentially programming on the managed class chips? For example, if you can make it mirror different data, whether it's like a sequential read or random read, so it returns different data, whether it's moving from it or doing an antivirus scan?
I've been able to dump what is running there on one specific vendor. The question is just how far have I gone? I'm going to generalize your question. How far have I gone with the managed? I've been able to dump from one vendor. I've started the analysis on how everything works, but that's about as far as I am right now. That was actually the original path, and then I found the MTD path. And I was like, God, this is way easier, right? And it's still my kind of impetus for this whole thing really was we treat NAND as secure and it's not. And we think we can trust our drives when I don't think we can. So I wanted to just point out how easily it was to abuse these things. And I could do that in a managed way. It would just be slightly harder, and it's academic to me at this point. But if you want to go on an academic trail, like I'm down because it's interesting. It just was a little out of scope. Yes. You can start writing to some of the arbitrary out-of-bound bytes. But since NAND has that kind of one-way problem of, like, I can bit flip to 0, but I can't bit flip to 1, you get in a weird position already with those. And that's a lot of bits that's basically one huge bit mask. And there's a lot of complexity in there. So I kind of just blew it away and just wiped the whole thing in zeros. I mean, I think you could, but your space to store data is going to be incredibly small. True. But you may have, you're talking about, you may have 16 bytes. It's across a very large NAND, yeah, you could totally still do that. And it would probably be very, very, very well hidden, assuming you didn't have to lose the bytes when you were writing. Any more? Because I think I'm way over time. Okay, great. Thank you.